Title: The secret KGB art smuggling network. They tried to hide **** in the Soviet Union. Art was never just decoration. It was history, identity, power. Every painting, every icon, every artifact represented something larger than itself. It represented a story the state wanted to control. And because of that, art became more than culture. It became a resource. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union faced a constant problem. It needed hard currency. Dollars. Foreign money that could be used outside its own economic system. The Soviet economy was largely closed. It could produce many things, but converting those into internationally accepted currency was difficult. And without that currency, many operations abroad became harder to sustain. Trade alone was not enough. Official exports were limited. And so, alternative methods began to appear. Some of them were visible. Others were not. One of the least discussed methods involved art, valuable objects, rare pieces, items that had both cultural and financial value. Officially, Soviet museums were among the most protected institutions in the country. Places like the Hermitage held some of the most important collections in the world. They were symbols of national pride. But behind the official narrative, a different process existed. Certain objects began to leave the country. Not publicly. Not announced. And not always recorded in a way that could be easily traced. This was not random theft. It was controlled, selected, organized. Specialists identified items that could be sold abroad. They looked for pieces that would attract interest from collectors. Works that had high value on the international market. Not always the most famous ones, but valuable enough, recognizable enough, and most importantly, movable. Once selected, these items entered a process. A quiet process. They were prepared for transport, documented in limited ways, and assigned to channels that could move them across borders. Moving such items was not simple. The Soviet Union controlled its borders strictly. Ordinary shipments would be inspected. So the system used different methods. Diplomatic channels were one option. Cultural delegations were another. People who had permission to travel. People whose cargo was not always subject to the same level of inspection. This created an opening. And that opening was used. The items were moved carefully. Sometimes officially declared as part of cultural exchange. Sometimes not declared at all. Once outside the country, the next phase began. Selling. But not in a direct or obvious way. The Soviet Union did not openly auction these items under its own name in many cases. Instead, intermediaries were used. Art dealers. Private collectors. Auction houses. Individuals who operated in the international art market. These intermediaries allowed distance. They created separation between the source and the sale. The items would appear in markets, be purchased, and then disappear into private collections, often without a clear public record of origin. The money generated from these sales did not return in a simple form. It moved through layers, accounts, front organizations, indirect financial structures, designed to avoid attention, designed to avoid clear tracing. This was not a single operation. It was a method, a system that could be used repeatedly. Over time, it became more refined, more controlled, more efficient, but also more difficult to track. Why art? Because art has unique characteristics. It is compact, high in value, and flexible in pricing. The same piece can be sold for different amounts depending on the buyer. This creates opportunities. It allows transactions to be adjusted. It allows value to be transferred in ways that are not always transparent. Art also carries legitimacy. Selling art is not automatically suspicious, especially when it moves through established markets. That makes it easier to hide. There were also individuals involved in facilitating these exchanges. Foreign businessmen, collectors, people who had relationships with Soviet institutions. They understood how the system worked. They knew how to navigate both sides. In some cases, they acted as bridges between a closed system and an open market. Their role was not always public, but it was important. This entire structure operated in a gray zone. Some transactions were officially approved. Others were not. Some were recorded. Others were kept minimal. And in many situations, the difference was not clearly defined. This allowed flexibility, but also created uncertainty. Over time, this system became part of a broader approach. An approach that combined official and unofficial methods, visible and invisible processes, all aimed at solving the same problem: access to foreign currency. But systems like this do not remain hidden forever. Changes in the Soviet Union began to affect how things operated. Economic reforms, political shifts, policies that introduced more openness. These changes increased transparency. Information began to surface. Documents became available. Stories were shared. And what had once been hidden became partially visible. But not completely. Many details remain unclear. Records are incomplete. Accounts differ depending on the source. And that leaves room for interpretation. What is certain is that art played a role beyond culture. It was used as a tool, a resource, a solution to a problem that could not be addressed openly. This case reveals something important. Control does not eliminate the need for adaptation. Even highly structured systems must find ways to operate beyond their limits. And when they do, they often create mechanisms that are not visible on the surface. The story of these operations is not just about art, it is about strategy, about necessity, about the choices made when standard options are not enough. Because sometimes, what is hidden tells you more than what is shown. And sometimes, the most valuable things are not the ones on display, but the ones that quietly disappear and leave no obvious trace behind.